Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Inside Today's Boardrooms from Diligent Institute, your source for the latest and greatest in corporate governance, all in 10 minutes. I'm your host, Lisa Edwards, Executive Chair of Diligent Institute, and today I'm joined by Tamara Brightwell, who is a corporate partner in Wilson Sonsini's DC office. Tamara, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Lisa.
So you are in the heart of all things regulatory there in DC. Maybe let's start by giving us a brief overview of some of the most significant trends we observed during the last proxy season.
Sure. I think, this last proxy season was an interesting one. As always, we're continuing to see investors focus on governance matters, including board effectiveness and accountability, as well as environmental and social matters. Of course, executive compensation and company performance also continue to be significant areas of focus for investors.
If you sort of take those trends and you look ahead, so project into 2025 and sort of some of the things that are starting to pop up now, what are some of the major trends and the changes that board members and corporate governance professionals should be preparing for? Are there any emerging issues that you see sort of coming that board members should start preparing for or keep preparing for if they're holdovers from last year?
Looking ahead to next year, I think engagement is going to continue to be key, right? And we saw a lot of engagement this year. I think companies are going to need to continue that. Companies and their boards really should continue their robust engagement. Really seeking to understand the voting decisions that shareholders are making and really evaluating their communications with the market. So, for example, based on what they were hearing from their investors through those votes from last proxy season or their other communications they're having, they really want to think about what areas they may want to strengthen some governance, or if there's areas of disclosure that they can better inform their investors about their governance, their business, or their performance. Thinking about whether the proxy statement really clearly conveys why the board and its nominees are best suited for their roles, and whether their disclosure, say, about their executive compensation clearly conveys their compensation decisions and programs. Those are some really good things for companies and their boards to be focused on. I think in terms of emerging issues, they remain focused and interested on what may happen with the SEC's climate disclosure rules. Those are stayed while the litigation is ongoing. And so, companies are continuing to keep an eye on that. It is really important for them to keep in mind that the SEC's prior guidance regarding those climate-related disclosures continues to be in effect. And so they'll really want to think about, their material climate-related risks or impacts to their business and make appropriate disclosures. Also needing to consider whether there are new regulatory regimes that they may be subject to disclosures related to climate.
Yeah, on the climate side, just a quick follow-up question there, because obviously, companies planned for and knew that some of the SEC proposed changes were coming down the road, but they also knew that and planned for those would be very quickly subject to litigation and probably go through some process. But I think what people maybe didn't see coming a couple of years ago as the train was rolling towards climate disclosure was the whole thing around Chevron and what is actually the scope of the SEC's remit. Is there any, do you have any insights on that?
That is an area that I think we're all keenly interested in and going to have to continue to take a look at. Certainly, I expect the SEC and other regulators are taking a step back and looking at rulemakings they have pending or ones they might want to propose or adopt and thinking about how that decision may impact them in terms of, the type of discretion that they were using under the statutes to propose and adopt those rules. And so, I think that remains to be seen how that's going to continue to play. I also think, one of the things they're probably thinking about is, the SEC and other regulators is they may not want to be the first one to test out how that's going to apply to them. And so, thinking more about the challenges that they have or appeals that they may may need to bring and how that might ultimately affect any sort of litigation strategy on rulemaking.
That's super interesting. So I think I may have cut you off. You had mentioned things like say on pay, and you'd mentioned climate. Was there anything else on your list of emerging issues?
I think one that is top of mind for people as well is artificial intelligence, or AI. I think that continues to be top of mind for companies, investors, and regulators as well. I think that companies and boards really want to get their arms around how they use AI within the business and how they talk about that in their disclosure, both in terms of how they use it in their business and the potential risks the business could face as a result. And I think those discussions and companies' use of AI are continuing to evolve. There's certainly some great benefits that companies may see through the use of AI, but the risks are there as well, and so they're going to want to be very careful about how they talk about that in their disclosures. And it's certainly an area that the SEC staff has started focusing some attention on. They've started issuing comments to companies on their disclosure when they see generic or boilerplate disclosure, rather than more targeted disclosure from those companies and their circumstances about how they use it in their business or how it may affect the company. So that's certainly an area I think that companies, management and boards will continue to focus on.
Okay, so lots going on the proxy side of the equation. In terms of the actual shareholder engagement and the activism, how do you see that landscape evolving? As you look at your client base, are there any specific strategies or practices that companies should adopt to better navigate these interactions that you say, what, this is really working?
I think that companies that are finding some success in engaging with their shareholders really are relying on communication, both in terms of the meetings that they may be having, the dialogue that they're having with their investors, as well as taking a look at their disclosures and making sure they're effectively communicating their story in terms of their business and their performance and their strategy. And so that's really an area I think they can continue to do that. Certainly, we're seeing continued engagement in shareholder proposals and activism with regard to director elections more generally. Shareholder proposals continue to increase. They increased year over year, continue to have the types of proposals you would expect: governance-related proposals, environmental and social proposals. The environmental and social proposals fared a little bit lower in terms of voting support than the governance proposals did this year. I think the other thing that was interesting about this season and that companies will need to continue to watch for the next is the implementation of universal proxy rules. This was the second season that those rules applied to companies, and we haven't seen a dramatic uptick in the number of contested elections that people once feared would be the case after those rules were adopted, but it's still early days, and we're continuing to watch that. It does appear that those rules had an impact, though. And so engagement is up with activists, and there's some data out there that suggests that more settlements are occurring with activists. I think it's an area that companies are going to need to, as I said, continue their engagement on, continue to effectively tell their story about their company to their investors, and really making sure that their disclosure is clear. If they're in a contested election situation, they're going to need to make sure that the disclosure around their voting options is very clear as well, to try and drive an optimal vote that they're looking for there. So I think it's an area that they're going to, continue to need to focus on. They'd be well served, again, in terms of evaluating their business and their performance, and thinking about whether changes need to be made, and either in terms of their strategy, in terms of their communications to investors, whether they're focusing those effectively, and whether they need to enhance their disclosures around that. I think all of those things can really help companies reap the rewards in terms of engagement and ultimately in shareholder voting decisions.
Well, that was, I think, fascinating for our listeners. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. So thank you, Tamara, for the rundown. If you are interested in learning more, you can find Tamara on the Wilson Sonsini website. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next time.